everyone for joining. It's really great to have you here today. You're very welcome. We ask that you keep, if possible, keep your camera on, but you mute your microphone so we don't get the sound of the chickens and the children in the mics. We are recording this session, and for everyone who's participated, we'll make this recording available afterwards. Our speaker is Dave Hotchkiss, who I'll introduce in a minute, but he will be talking for about 45 minutes, and then there will be a time for questions and discussion at the end. Now, Dave, I've personally known for many years. He's actually an electrical engineer by profession, so he's really very clever with communication and electronic equipment, but he worked for many years at Africa Enterprise in Pietermaritzburg, and later started Radio Maritzburg and has been involved in the setup of many community radio stations. He was also the general manager of the ACM from 2003 to 2012 and facilitated many Christian radio stations. This is Mr. Christian Radio, I would say. So we're really honored to have you here, Dave, today. In 2012, he even helped in commercial radio to set up Vuma 103 FM. And in 2016, he founded a non-profit company called Sarepta Radio Consulting, which he's with now. And he does many courses in radio production, and he's based in KZN. So Dave is going to be talking to us a little bit about audience research. You know, when you behind the microphone, at least me, I'm behind the microphone today, I can see some of your faces, but when you in a radio studio, you don't know if anyone's listening, you don't know how to determine who's listening and what do they look like, what's their ages, are they poor, rich, where do they come from? And David's going to be introducing us to how we can research, do a little bit more research to know who our audience is and a little bit more about them. So Dave, it's great to have you. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Nerden, and it's great to be here with a whole lot of radio people. Very exciting. Okay, can I just kick off? I just want to pray first. Father, I just pray that you'll help us to learn what you want to teach us today and give us open hearts, and may we encourage each other. In Jesus' name, amen.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Nerden and ACM. I'm going to share my screen here, and so you can follow on the slides as we go. Just see if this is going to work. Right. Can you see the slide there? And I can see some of you, and I can see the slide. It's just a way it's not moving forward. All right, let's do it here. On the dining table. Okay, sorry, interruption there. Radio audience research, practical low-cost research options using basic low-cost research to help you target your content more effectively. And this is all about seeing where you are going. And the I there, just remember that. You need to see where you're going. Without that, you won't be on target. And what is the key to successful radio? I hope you've got that. What is the key to successful radio? What makes your radio station, your radio ministry effective? It is giving listeners what they want. And how do you know what your listeners want unless you're doing some research? And without audience research, you are just groping in the dark. You need it. If you have an audience and you don't do audience research, you are groping in the dark. And in today's talk, there are two main things I want to achieve in this presentation. One is to motivate you to do research, and secondly is to give you some tools to start with. This is where we kick off. I think that most people don't do research because they can't afford it. And this is usually the thing. Why aren't you doing audience research? Well, we haven't got the money to do it. It's too expensive. My retort to that is the only thing that is more expensive than research is not doing research. Just do some sums. What is your turnover per month or per year? Well, let's say you're turning over $250,000 a month. In a year, 3 million costs you to run your setup. If you spend a year going in the wrong direction, how much is that costing you? It's costing you 3 million. If your turnover is $500,000 a month, it's costing you 6 million. You can do an awful lot of research for that amount of money. But don't worry, I'm not going there. All I'm saying is just you need to spend something on research. Otherwise, you're going to waste an awful lot of money. Where are we now? What do you need to know? What is this research about? What do you need to know? As we said earlier on, you need to know what your listener wants. But who's your listener? Who is listening? That is an important question, because you sit in the studio and you can't see who is listening. At least when I'm talking now, I can see some of you on my screen on the right, but I can't see all of you. If this was a radio studio, I wouldn't see anyone. What are they interested in? Because if you don't know what they're interested in, how can you give them how can you actually give them what they want? Do they want news? Do they want Christian teaching? Do they want music? What are they interested in? Thirdly, what do they buy? I mean, if all your listeners are buying motor cars, well, that's a good place to start. If all your listeners are buying mealie meal, that's another place to start. So it's important to know what your listeners are buying. Are they into fashion? Do they buy clothes? So what do they buy? Because that gives you a clue as to where you need to go for your advertising, assuming that you are selling advertising. Where do they shop? Likewise, are they shopping locally? Are they shopping online? Are they shopping in the big centers? It's important to know that so that you can target your advertising. What music do they like? Are they into jazz, African gospel, classical? You need to know so that you can give them what they want. Where do they listen? Are they listening in the motor car? Are they listening at home? Are they listening at work? Are they listening on the train, on the bus, on the combi? Where do they listen so that you can target your programs appropriately? How do they listen? What device are they listening on? Is it on a phone, on a radio, a car radio, a computer? How are they listening? When do they listen? This is very important. If all your listeners are listening at 9 o'clock at night, you need to find out why. And that leads to the last question. Why do they listen? So there's a lot you need to know in order to give these people what they want. And then how do you find out? And there are three basic options here. Are you going to use polls or a survey? In other words, short answers. And that is what we're going to focus on in this presentation, is that option. Just wait, I've lost my mouse here. Or are we going to look, an interview, person-to-person interview, or a telephone is another option, or a focus group with in-depth questions. Now, to do interviews or a focus group, you need trained people. The normal volunteer that you'll find that we're going to really focus on in today's presentation won't know how to put together an interview or a focus group without training. So just beware of those options, because you can lead people to give them the answers that you want and not the answers that are going to help you. So it's, we're going to really stick in this presentation where we're talking about low budget, easy to do, short questions, polls, surveys. Who do you ask? I think it is important, you obviously need to ask your target group. If you are a geographical community station, your target group is everyone who lives in your geographical area. If you are a community of interest radio station, your target group is your community of interest. If you are another ministry or an internet radio station, it is very important that you establish who your target group is, because you will never, ever, ever keep everyone happy all the time. It's an impossibility. You've got to focus. So you need to find out from your target group. Or you can find out from your listeners, your existing listeners who may be different from your target group. It's important that you know that. Then you can decide whether you change your target or you change your listeners. But it's easier. You can get a lot of information from your listeners. Or using social media, your social media followers who may be different from your FM listeners, who may be different from your target group. That's important to get that information. And then we're going to look at a representative sample, and I'll be explaining that a little bit further as we go on. Okay, so who do you ask? You've got those options. Let's start on the planning process. Firstly, what you need to know. And this is, I'm not going to tell you that answer. You need to work it out in your context. What is the most useful thing that you need to start with? You've got to start somewhere. What do you need to know? Secondly, how are you going to find out? And we're going to look at some of the options going forward shortly. But you need to know, how are you going to find out? Thirdly, who will run with the project? And if you're the station manager and you think that you're going to run with research in your spare time between midnight and 1 in the morning, forget it. It's not going to work. You need to have somebody in your organization who is responsible for research. And maybe they can do some other things, but the more time they can think research, dream research, plan research, that is so important, because unless it is a focus, it's actually not going to happen. So you need to assign somebody who's going to run with the project. And depending what kind of research you're going to do will determine who's going to do it. As Nerden said, I had a few years in commercial radio. Commercial radio spends a lot of time and money on doing research, because it's not because they have time and money to waste. It's because if they don't do research, they're going to waste time and money. And there's a misconception with the community people that commercial radio has a lot of time and money, or a lot of money, but that's not true. They are struggling more than the community guys financially, most of them. So you need to have somebody who's dreaming research and running with it. Fourthly, in your planning, how much will it cost? You need to estimate that ahead of time so that you don't run, start it and then find you can't afford it. And how are you going to pay for it? Normally, research is not that expensive. It'll come out of your marketing budget. And I hope that you've got some marketing budget when you're running your organization. Sixth, how will you use the results? That is so important, because you need to decide on that before you start. And we're going to, I'm going to come to the pitfalls at the end, but one of the problems is that people do research and then they don't like the results, so they bin them. But it happens over and over again. So don't laugh that that happens. You need to decide on how you're going to use the results before you start. This is how the survey process works. If you start on the right, you take an action. Then going down to the bottom, you get information on the results of the action. You correct the action, and then you decide on the next action needed. So it's a constant process, and it's a slow process. I've got the picture of the little cruise liner at the bottom there. I don't know whether any of you had experience trying to skipper a boat that's more than sort of a couple of meters long. But I had a couple of experiences on what they called a narrow boat on the Thames in the UK. You see something coming in front of you that you need to avoid. So you turn to the right to avoid it. Nothing happens. The boat carries on towards the obstacle. In the end, you've got to put power to actually shift that boat. So it's a long process. You can't maneuver a ship in a couple of meters. So the big cruise liners and so on take many kilometers to maneuver. It's, you've got to work and plan and take time on this. So that is important. And by the way, I didn't mention this to start with. Please jot your questions on the chat. I can't see the chat as I'm giving the presentation, but Nerden, who's chairing, can pick up the questions. We'll go back at the end. You'll have at least, well, hopefully half an hour to answer questions, to fire questions on practical problems that you've had perhaps with doing research in your organization. But it does take time and takes dedication. This is a little bit of a sidestep, but I think it's an important sidestep. In the past, there's been a lot of emphasis on the RAMS number. How many listeners do you have? 10,000, 5,000, 50,000, 500,000? It's not that important. And the commercial radio stations are realizing that the number of listeners is not that important. Your quality of listeners is, in fact, just as important as your quantity. 100,000 passive listeners versus 1,000 active, your 1,000 active listeners can be much more effective than your 100,000 passive listeners. When I mean being effective, let's just look at the next slide. This is research that was done in Australia. They researched listeners to Christian and commercial radio stations. And you'll see the headline here: Christian radio listeners are highly responsive. If you look halfway down there, visited a website, Christian radio listeners are 2.2 times more likely to visit a website that they're told about than commercial radio listeners. Give to a sponsor's financial appeal, 3.5 times more likely. Access the service that is advertised, 2 times, more or less 2 times more likely. And attend an event, 2 times more likely, and so on. So what is important in selling advertising is not how many listeners, but are those listeners going to respond? In my few years at commercial radio, Vuma came out of a community station, KNI. And shortly after we started Vuma, I think it was Game Stores, ran an advert on a number of commercial stations, including Vuma. And part of this advert is they wanted listener response to a certain activation. And the report back was that the listener response they got from Vuma, which came from community radio roots, was of a totally different caliber to that they experienced from the other commercial stations. So don't look at listener numbers. What you need to look at is listener response. And make sure if you're selling advertising that you're not selling yourself short, because you can deliver listener response far more effectively than the commercial stations. Okay, that's a little sideline. Okay, then I'm going to, this is just a summary now. All research requires a two-way process, either person-to-person process or remote, dealing with polls, or via social media. So all research is a two-way process. And this is the difficulty. You can't sit in your studio broadcasting on FM and think you're going to get research results. It doesn't work that way. Case study 1. So I'm going to take you through 2 case studies, and Nerden in his introduction mentioned Radio Maritzburg. This was my first radio station. And I'm going to go back a little bit in history. This is Pietermaritzburg Town Hall. And in 1993, we started getting ready for this radio station. We did research to prove the demand and, sorry, I've lost my slide. Right, there we go. To prove to ICASA that there was demand and need for this radio station. And this is a common thing. If you're applying for a community station, ICASA requires this. We were the first on the block. And we thought, well, if they wanted this, we were going to deliver on it. We were going to do our own research. We divided Pietermaritzburg into 6 areas, each of a known population according to the most recent census, and each representing different demographics. Cities still have this today. You have the township areas, you have the rich areas, you have different areas that represent different types of population. It used to be racial division, now it's more socioeconomic divisions. So you need to then be aware of that. And you can't just go into one area and do your research there. You need to do your research in the different areas. Sampling, research always requires sampling. We interviewed 1 in 500 people Sorry, it's not over 15. It's over, must be, yeah, over 550. Oh, sorry, 1 in 500 people over 15 were interviewed. So we didn't bother with the children, and we did about 550 interviews, person to person. The interview team, we trained 12 volunteers. The training is important. These people must not identify where they come from. They can wear some sort of identification, but not identification that identifies them with you as a brand, because this needs to be as independent as possible. Then here's how we looked at it. The area, north, south, east, west, eastward woodlands, and the city center, population of each. We then divided that up on age group. So you can see north, south, east, west, center. You can see there how many people we needed to interview in each age group: 15 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54 in each area. So we knew exactly how many people that we needed to interview. We did a male-female split, 50-50, and we sent the teams into the different areas to answer the questionnaire. 7-page questionnaire. We got a lot of information. This was just a sample of the first page. Which radio stations do you listen to regularly? We ticked that. You can see this is a questionnaire that came back. It has answers on it. What times of the day you're likely to listen to the radio? Would you listen to a radio station that served only the local area? And so on. 7 pages of it, a lot of useful information. The advantages of doing it like this: well, you can give broad or targeted data that is reliable and trustworthy if the sampling is high enough. So we sampled 1 in 500 people as a representative sample. So we made sure that we had a representative group across socioeconomic, race, ages that represented the whole population of Pietermaritzburg. Obviously, you don't need to do a whole town. You can do your target area if you have a particular geographic area, or but you can't go in and do one church. That's not going to tell you anything. You know, if your target is your Christian listeners, you need to divide that up and target all the churches, or at least a representative sampling right through different age groups and so on. The other advantage, this can be a fun project for a group of young people. The team that we trained, they did so well. They weren't paid, they were volunteers, we paid transport only, but they enjoyed it. Can be very cost effective. We got a lot of reliable information for very little money. It gets results from the general public, not just your listeners. Of course, there wasn't a radio station at that time, but you know, you can do this carefully even if you do have a radio station at this time to get results from the general public. What do they want from a radio station? What are the issues that are bothering them? So on. Okay, there are some disadvantages. Or some problems that you encounter, particularly now. Okay, that survey was done a number of years ago and the situation is worse here. It does not work in wealthy communities or in high crime communities. You know, the typical question is young people going around with a questionnaire, asking questions. A lot of people will refuse to answer. they will be very worried about that. In your wealthy communities, you can't get through the gates of the prison that the wealthy people build for themselves. So it's difficult. So you've got to bear that in mind. It takes a lot of careful planning. It needs good leadership. You've got to make sure that your team is doing the job well, and is not shortcutting, is not filling out questionnaires without doing interviews, all of that kind of thing. It needs integrity. It needs good leadership within your team. But the result, we were granted the first community radio license in the country. First community radio broadcast license in the country was granted to Radio Maritzburg. This is the press cutting, 25 November 1994. That was a while ago. But we were granted the license. We gained a lot of valuable information. We also got contacts. People were asked in the questionnaire, are you interested in getting involved in radio? What skills can you bring to it? And so on and so on. We got ideas of content. What sort of programs would you like to listen to? And so on. Okay, so that was my case study one. Doing it, it's not impossible. It's not too difficult to do research like that. How are we doing for time? We're doing fine. Just jot down your questions, because I'd rather go further on and then we'll come back and answer the questions. Okay, case study 2. We're going to go right up to date. This is based on a ICASA radio use of data management program 2020. This is last year. Now, I wasn't personally involved in this, and I'm pulling information from an article in Media Online. And so this is a little bit of, it's not as close an involvement as in the last one, but I've done some similar things at VUMA, but it wasn't as well documented, and it wasn't as successful as this. Okay, data analysis in radio enables continuous learning from actual listeners' behaviors. This is one of the big pluses now with digital feedback. It's immediate. And the second point here, it provides real-time audience insight across the radio properties. The problem is that FM itself has difficulty on delivering this kind of feedback. So you've got to use digital in parallel with your FM. And so we'll see how this is done. Yeah, of course, if you're using online radio, it has real-time insight built into the package. Your online streaming provider should be able to provide you with data on who is listening to you on your online radio at any time of the day. So FM, you're groping in the dark. Online, you're not. Okay, you've got to be able to separate out your bots that are not real people from your real people, but your service provider should be able to do that for you. So online radio has that big advantage in that you've got real-time insight built into the package. But East Coast radio, of course, is primarily ICASA, FM stations, Gauteng and KZN, primarily FM. And how they did this is they featured compelling on-air content on the website and on social media. So in other words, you take your on-air content and you encourage people to engage on your website and on your social media on the same content. you use then content-derived questions in a poll to motivate listener responses. So you then ask questions on that content and you encourage listeners to respond to those questions on your digital platforms. You can use something, I mean, East Coast Radio has their own system built in, but of course, as community stations, we don't have that. You can use things like SurveyMonkey. Google also has a poll program that is free. All of this is free stuff. And you can use that to get your responses. And this is from the article. From this, we were able to tell which cities the voters lived in, the interests of the people reading the article, and ultimately increased time spent on the site and overall engagement. So it's a case then of driving or motivating people to engage, who are your FM listeners, to engage digitally on your platforms. And I'm going to, go into this a little bit more. The comment here with real-time and analytics, we're able to see what content is being looked at from which device, which age group, and their interests. Yeah, this is probably your comment as well, my comment. ICASA has a lot of money to spend on comprehensive back-end analysis of their digital, but a lot of information is available from our websites and from our social media platforms and from our streaming service providers. So we don't need to have the big budgets of ICASA. Obviously, those big budgets do help, but there's a lot that we can do with the budgets that we have. Competitions. These are very, very useful. If you can't afford research, give the money away on competitions. This is even scriptural. Where's my verse here? Luke 16, verse 9, Jesus said, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself. But you need to have a careful plan to harvest the information. Don't throw money away. You can, for example, this is just some examples. You can run the same giveaway at different times and analyze who's listening and what their interests are. In other words, for people to get some money, they need to respond. From that, you can analyze, you can get their names, you can find out what they're interested in, and so on in your polls. You can use voicemail and pick answers to build engagement. Also, of course, if they're responding, whether it's on your WhatsApp or whatever platform you're using, you have their names and numbers. And if you're going to give them some money, you need the EFT, well, you need their bank account details, but you don't need to use those. But it does help you to know who they are and get more information about them. And East Coast Radio, they had Every Listener Wins activation, prize money of 150,000. In terms of research, that's not a lot of money. In terms of your operating costs for the year, it's not a lot of money. And they gave away 150,000 over 13 hours to 30 winners, again 4,500 Rand each. The remaining 15,000 was used for online giveaways, 5,000 on social media, 10,000 on the website. And of course, the website saw a massive increase in traffic. So you can use that very effectively. And this is continue with the East Coast. We're able to generate 3,217 leads by adding a forum to the end of the poll. People East Coast Radio can now engage with through a newsletter, event invitation, focus group, or another form of marketing. But yeah, just that's one example of what they did to get a whole lot of information. They put some money to it, but it wasn't that much. Okay, use every opportunity to make friends. And these this is okay. That was the end of the ICASA activation. That example. So I've given you two examples. The Radio Maritzburg one, which was very different. It was face-to-face interviews, old technology. It worked. And then the ICASA one, which was using social media, digital responses. It also worked. But what can you use with what you've got without even going there? I just want to move something here. Okay. You've got WhatsApp and Facebook groups. Use them. You can put different listeners in different WhatsApp groups. You know who they are. You build friends with them. That is so important, is your friend building. You've got Facebook groups these days. You can have a group for different programs. Build your groups, build your listener interaction. The old days, or not necessarily the old days, but these days still, in mission radio, a lot of work is done with listener clubs, because this provides a way of discipling people. They meet together. I know the COVID thing is a little bit more difficult now, but that is still an option that you can look at, is your listener clubs. And of course, ICASA likes to get feedback about your programming from your listeners, and you can use listener clubs to do that. That's what they like. Oh, wait. Okay, something is not happening for me. It looks like I've got to get back here. Okay. I'm not promoting anyone's software, but I'm just giving you some options here, and I'm going to give a few more options. There's Fabric, who've done a lot of work in marketing into community radio. They basically set up a private portal so that you, of course, when the advantage of the problem with using WhatsApp, Facebook, you're using Facebook to your advantage, and they're using you for their advantage. If you don't like that idea, you can pay Fabric. They will set up a private portal which gives deeper data insights into your own community through real-time human engagement. That's their thing. So it enables you to analyze who is listening and set up your own private group. Then you can also use, and just look at this option, SMS landing pages. SMS is still a very useful tool, because all you need is a phone number, and the person that you send the SMS to, they don't even need data, they don't need a smartphone. But if they do have a smartphone and you send an SMS with a link, you can then ask questions and you can get to know that person better. So look at that option, your SMS portal, landing pages. There are few options. There are a number of companies that can help you and provide that information. You can probably do it yourself, but I'm not sure how. But it's not expensive. It's a cheap option. Okay, right. Now, the pitfalls, the problems. Poor guy there hiding behind his desk, and the comment, researching new projects is a lot easier than evaluating existing ones. As soon as you start researching somebody's pet project, pet program, pet content, they will feel very threatened. Just be aware of that. They may then try and shipwreck your research as far as possible. But so you've got to deal with that right up front and get them on side. Otherwise, researching new projects is much easier than evaluating existing ones. Trying a new program, a new outreach, whatever, do your research first. Secondly, do not rush it. There's a saying here, if I can read it to you, it was a bit too long to put on the slide. Your research can be cheap, it can be fast, it can be high quality. Pick any two. So if you do something in a rush, it'll either be low quality or very expensive. You can take your pick on that. You can't have all three. So if you haven't got a lot of money, take it slowly and get quality. And I'm going to just spell that out a little bit. Plan your questions carefully. So we're again focusing on the poll here. Plan your questions carefully. Write down the why you are asking the question and the possible action you're going to take from the answers to that question. It is important to do that up front. Don't just jot down questions, spend a lot of money in getting the answers to them, and then not know where you go from there. Plan your questions carefully. Hold a planning meeting after the survey. This is so important. Agree on the action and the next stage of research. Remember, we had that slide, which we had the ship on, we had the thing, you know, going around. It's a circular process. It takes time. So after you've done the survey, a lot of problems with surveys is people do a survey and then they shove it all in a drawer because they don't like the results or they don't know how to handle them. So it is very important to plan before, plan after. Then what about ICASA license conditions? That's a question that often comes up. If the survey tells me that we need to change our programs, and this is what the listeners are saying, this is what my survey is saying, this is what my research is saying, but ICASA has the condition that this is what we're supposed to deliver on. What do we do? Now, ICASA, the way they look at things is research is really the domain of commercial, but if you can justify as a community station that you need to do the research and you show how you've done it, it is valid. Secondly, ICASA likes the community involved in any changes. So if you do your research and then you go back to your AGM, call a community meeting, however you engage with your community, you share the research and say, this is the result of this. We're no longer going to broadcast to anyone over 30. We're only going to broadcast to those over, under 20. So all of you guys that have been enjoying our programs, you'll no longer be able to enjoy them. Well, if you can convince them from the research that you need to do that, then you can go back to ICASA and say the community is behind this, the research is behind this, this is what we're going to do. But my advice to you is take things slowly. When you change content, even if the research says that you should change content, change it slowly. It's quick and easy to lose listeners. It is slow and long to gain new ones. So if you realize that by changing your content, you're going to lose half your listeners. But you have a potential to gain many, many more. It's not going to happen straight away. You're going to lose all of those ones straight away, but it's going to take a lot longer to actually pull the new ones in. So just go slowly. Now I'm just going to give you some resources, and then I'm going to kind of finish off and hand over to you for questions. Just some of the possibilities here. This costs money. Asterio, and there are many more that I'm probably not going to list that are also available. This is a company that does audio monitoring, so they can tell you how often an ad was played. They monitored the audio from your station, how often music was played, and so on and so on. So if that is important to you, that is a resource that is available. Colony Live, they do your social media analysis. And we talked a little bit about East Coast Radio. ICASA kind of does it in-house. You can do quite a bit in-house, but you can get a company like Colony Live. They will come in and analyze from your social media, who is responding to what. FGI, Freshly Ground Insights, they're a research company. If you want to spend a lot of money on doing face-to-face research, you can use them. My advice to you is do it yourself. If you do it carefully, you can do it right. Then there is a book that is available, written by, I can't remember, it's Audience Dialogue. The book is called Know Your Audience. It is available online, or you can buy it. But online obviously is free, so if you take that link and you click on it, you'll find a book. It tells you step by step how to do audience research for a radio station. It's a little bit outdated. It doesn't go into all the latest digital, but it is a useful resource. Okay, my conclusion, number one, you cannot afford to run blind. Please do research. Secondly, you need to appoint a research manager. Somebody needs to take responsibility for this research, otherwise it's not going to happen. Thirdly, research must align to your goals. I think that's obvious, but just bear that in mind. Fourthly, your whole research team must be committed to the research. It's not something that somebody does over there, otherwise people will be very threatened by it. Everyone needs to be committed to it and be working with it. Then start small and simple. Don't start with something complicated. Otherwise you're going to get discouraged and it's not going to happen. But let research permeate your whole organization. Don't rush it, but keep moving. It's a continuous process. It's not something that you do next week and finish it the week after. Okay, I think that's about it. Oh yes, now I've got an inspiration here. A successful radio station requires planning and precision. SpaceX, they take these rockets off and they land them again. That requires planning and precision. It's not easy. They don't always get it right, but and neither will you. But you've got to make sure that you're committed to that process. Okay, then I've got to put on focus groups. I'm not going to do this. I think it's too complicated unless we want to go there. And I think that is where I'm at.
Right, thank you, Dave.
Awesome. Thanks, Nerden.
You covered a lot in that.
Yes, I hope not too much.
As you can hear with Dave's experience in radio, you know, there's just so many layers that come through there. At the moment, we're planning to end this session very promptly at 11:30, so we've got another half an hour for questions and any interaction you want to have. So Dave did invite you to put your questions in the chat. I've got 2 posts in the chat so far that maybe we can deal with. The first one is from Sinatemba, who says, how do you actually get listeners to respond? Because sometimes you can come up with topics that you think will be really informative, and they still don't respond as much as you had anticipated. Sometimes these are topics that the listeners themselves requested, but the engagement rate doesn't meet your expectations.
Engagement, it grows, and you've got to start it slowly. And you've got to make it easy for people to engage. You need to just ask, ask some questions. Perhaps if you've got phone numbers, ask, do some research on that. Some of the people, do they engage non-voice? In other words, are they happy to send WhatsApp messages, but they don't want their voice on air? That is, can be, but you need to find out what the blockage is. And possibly the questions that you are answering are not really the questions that most of the people want. Again, you need to do some more research on that. Of course, you can offer incentives, money prizes, or partner with the local shop, vouchers so that they're paying the advertising, they're putting the incentive in, and try and get a response in that way. But you may be getting different people who respond. It's not really the people that you want to respond on your content. But I think if you're not getting the response, you need to do some research on that. I mean, it's a very interesting question because, my first radio station was Radio Maritzburg, and we battled to get response. My second radio station was KNI, which was, Radio Maritzburg was a geographical community station. KNI was a Christian community station. We struggled until we chucked out English and we made it only Zulu. People then felt that they owned the station, and boy, they then responded. So that was just such an interesting, maybe there's something in your content or in who you are that makes them reluctant. And you need to try and get to the bottom of that. Because generally, certainly amongst the Zulu-speaking people that we have here around Durban, they love responding. They want to have their voice on the radio. They want to get in there and have their say. And the problem is keeping them quiet, not getting them to respond. But in early days at Radio Maritzburg, we struggled, and we had to build it very slowly, bit by bit.
Great, thanks, Dave. I can bear that out in the radio station I was involved with, that it does grow over time, and you've almost got to get your listeners into the habit of responding. It's quite intimidating to contact a radio station. So start them on easy things, like why not on your breakfast show have birthday tributes? If you've got a birthday in your family, send us a tribute to your mother who's having a birthday. So that's an easy one. But once they've done that once, then they will be more likely to respond on other more difficult questions. So it's about getting your listeners into the habit of responding. So that's my little penny's worth in there. Great. Okay, Dave, we've got another question for you from Phil, which is also, I think, a very interesting question. Phil says, my passion for broadcasting is the Great Commission, giving the gospel of hope through Christian music, teaching, discipling, etc., through local preachers, teachers, biblical studies. But how does this work with the notion of giving them what they want? If they don't know what they want, and if they don't want Jesus, and they don't at least know they need him. So that's one part of his question. So okay. It's quite an interesting one, that, because you might have an intention in mind, and how, you can't, you want to almost lead your listeners somewhere. How do you give them what they want, but it still lead them in the direction of your vision?
Yes, I think that, to me, the answer to that is quite simple. You need to give your listeners what they want, not what you want. Mm. And deep down that they really want a relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. But they don't know that. You need to start with their felt needs, their actual, what are the things that are challenging them, what are the things that are interesting them. And then addressing it from that side. Unless you are just, this whole thing of radio, evangelistic radio, whether you're doing pre-evangelism or whether you're teaching Christians, motivating them to go out and evangelize. So you've got to decide exactly what your strategy is. But if you are planning to reach non-Christians, perhaps you're attracting them with the music, you then need to use that music as a bridge to the gospel. Because there are a lot of, even whether you're using Christian or non-Christian music, there's a lot of interesting or useful emotions, ideas, life experiences there that you can use as bridges to where you want to go. So you've got to. A successful radio station is giving the listeners what they want. You need to find out what they want, and your goal, let's say, is to disciple or to evangelize or whatever. You then need to decide on how you're going to bridge those two together and have a strategy for it. So I think that's. I hope I've answered that.
Great. I can just add, sorry, Dave.
Please, because you've got a lot of experience.
Is that if you just look at the way Jesus did it, he gave people what they want. If it was fishing, he spoke fishing. If it was farming, he spoke farming. So he hooked them by talking about what is of interest to them. And that hooks them into the conversation. So that's what it means about giving them what they want, is find out, what are the needs in your community? What are the things that they're suffering with? What are the things that are concerning them? What are the things that are interesting them? Talk about those things as the hook to get them towards Jesus. Yeah. is what I've learned over many years. So now, I think there's another question, another part to his question, which I'm not sure is really so relevant to this discussion. I want to maybe his question was, how do I combine this with the ICASA requirements for community station? Is this objective possible? The whole objective of the gospel and community stations is another whole discussion, Dave. I'm not sure if you want to go there yet, because I've got a few other questions.
Okay, can I just tackle that one quickly? Because I think that there's a whole, if you are a community of interest station, okay, you define to ICASA that, the Christian community is my community of interest, which you then need to address the Christian community. So you need to make sure that your community of interest is actually your community and tie all your goal, get everything lined up. Because, there may be some problems when you first submitted your license application, that things have changed since then. But go back to ICASA and say, look, this has changed, my community has changed, this is what they want. As long as ICASA sees that the thing comes from your community and not from someone up top who's steering it, they are totally happy to accept that and to make those changes. But make sure that right from the start you define your community and you deliver on it. That is critical.
Great. Okay. Can we respond to a question from Radio Kwezi, which said, Radio Kwezi celebrated 25 years last year. Moving forward, we're trying to improve different areas of our work, especially marketing and sales. Part of the plan is to develop surveys and use that info to get new advertisers. We've started to use Colony Live. What would be on?
Okay.
What would be
more revenue, getting new clients? All right. Yeah. No, I picked that up.
Yeah.
Look, Colony Live harvests information from your SMS, social media, WhatsApps, and so on. So they are not going to go out there and do anything for you. They're purely analyzing what comes in, which is very useful, but maybe, of possibly less use, I'm not sure, to Radio Kwezi that may not have that much digital media coming in. And as far as Kwezi goes, I think that my Radio Maritzburg model is a possibility that can be used in small towns and used very effectively to find out, what people want. The information that I have is that Kwezi is a geographical station. Obviously, it's a vast rural area. You can't survey the whole of it, but you can take representative towns within that, or just start with one town and do a survey, cross-section of age groups and so on, just to ask questions about what people want to listen to, what they buy, and so on, which can then help getting revenue from advertising clients. And also build listenership, because you are going to build listenership by getting out of the radio station and there into the community. That works. The commercial guys know it. That's why they sponsor cycling races and so on and so on. It's important to get out there into the community. That I'm not saying don't do Colony Live, but I would not rely on that. I think that you need to be out there doing face-to-face surveys, getting information in parallel to Colony Live, analyzing what comes in on your digital.
Yeah. Colony Live is only analyzing what's already coming in. And
that's right.
As over time, the analysis gets better and better. So the more your listeners interact on WhatsApp, the more they interact through Colony Live platform, the more information you'll have. But it's only one stream, as Dave says. You've got to have other means of getting information outside of that. Great. Let me just see. I don't think...
Kwezi, are you guys happy with that? I don't know whether there's any follow-up on that.
So it's clear, thank you. They responded. Do we have any other questions? Anyone want to ask any other questions? Perhaps you want to be brave. This is now like we're wanting to get listener response here, and we're not getting response. So how do we get a listener response today? So maybe you don't want to type it in there. I will be very brave now and let you unmute your mic, put up your hand, and if you want to ask Dave a question or interact or make a comment, here's your chance. Okay, Robin. Good morning. We didn't greet you at the beginning, but welcome. You want
Hi,
to
good morning.
just introduce yourself a little bit, where are you from, and then ask your question.
Okay, so I'm Robin and we're from Nelspruit. It's Radio Laagveld, 100.5 FM. Dave, thanks for the presentation. Maybe just a question. In general, how many of these researches do we do as community radio stations? I guess it's what we're able to do, but we kind of battle to get to one a year. Is that kind of the same feeling all over?
My response to that is yes. I think if you're doing, one a year, you're doing fine. Because when you go out, you do the research, you come back, you decide what you're going to do with that research, and then you plan the next research. And one a year is okay. I wouldn't try and, if you're going to try and do one every couple of months, you're going to rush it. This thing takes time, because when you make changes that come from research, it takes time to actually get results from those changes. And if you then kind of do the next research before the last research has actually had effect, or the changes that result from the last research has had effect, there's going to be confusion. I wouldn't do extensive research. Okay, you need to have constant, when I'm referring, I'm talking to, talking about doing a whole, a whole action out there, but you need to have someone who's analyzing your Facebook, your WhatsApp, just picking up what is happening through your digital responses. I mean, you can, you can pay Colony Live to do that for you, or you can do it yourself. If you're not paying them, then somebody needs to be just keeping an eye on that. How's the response to this program? That also then helps you plan your next research activation, whether you're doing that by questionnaire, poll people on the street, or however. It needs, as I said, it's very useful to have somebody who's keeping a finger on that all the time, and then also planning the actual research itself.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Thank you, Dave. Anyone want to raise their hands to ask a question, or shall we conclude it here?
Yeah, I just want to say that a lot of this has been very focused on radio station. That is my experience. And I hope that the radio stations have really benefited from that. I mean, there are a few people here that are not representing radio stations. I hope they've got enough out of it for it to be useful. And going forward from here, for example, Kwezi, if you want to go out and do a person-to-person survey in a town or something like that, and you want more information on how we did the Radio Maritzburg thing, I've got all that information. So I'm available to help with follow-up. I'm not, I haven't done the digital research and analysis recently, and technology is moving all the time. So you need to then go out there, do that, learn from it, and come back. But hopefully I've given you enough of the kind of inspiration and, even the guys at East Coast Radio, they are available. I've got contacts there who can actually help on, some of those things, and we can, if there are people that want to take that further, we can pursue that.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I hope you found this helpful, people. I see we've got one more message. Let me just see what it says. Kyla's given some input. Thank you. That's great. Thanks, Kyla. Anyway, so Dave, thank you. Thanks one and all. I think, Natalie, is that it? I can just let you know about future sessions. Is that correct, Natalie?
Yes.
Okay. So I hope you've enjoyed this today. Thank you so much, Dave. You really gave a great presentation there. It was very fruitful, and I think it's worth repeating it later this year, because I think more people need to hear about it. We've got another 2 training sessions coming up. I don't have the dates in front of me, but Natalie will be sending you the information about those training sessions. Please register if you haven't already done so. The next one we're going to be doing is a real hot topic for all radio stations. That's on finances, which will be led by Greg Clure from Link FM in East London. And the one following that will be on news with Peter Rice. So please join us in the future for these training sessions, and we hope you find them helpful. Thank you. Natalie, do you want to say anything further? Do you want to give us those dates, or will you rather send it on an email?
Well, it's next Thursday is the one with Greg Clure on finances, and the Thursday after that is the one with Peter Rice on news. So if you haven't already registered, we encourage you to try and attend those as well. And then just to say that the recording of this session will be made available to everyone who has attended today.
Great. Okay, well, thanks one and all. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you, Jesus, for a wonderful time together. And we bless all the people involved and all the radio stations represented here today. In Jesus' name, amen. Bless you one and all. Thank you.
Thank you
so much. God bless you.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Natalie.
Thank you.
Thank you.